Now, a new scientific procedure dates fabric from the shroud to roughly 2,000 years ago.
This linen cloth shouldn't exist, or at least not in the way it does. Preserved in Italy's Turin Cathedral, the Shroud of Turin has sparked questions that stretch far beyond theology.
They believe that the almost transparent image, which changes in appearance with varying light,
a 14-foot fabric with the faint imprint of a crucified man, it remains one of history's most studied and disputed relics. Scientists debate it. Believers revere it. But now, a new voice enters the conversation.
Yeah. And I always thought that was fake. It was like in the 80s.
What is that, Eddie?
Graham Hancock. Known for challenging mainstream history, Hancock suggests we've overlooked deeper truths buried in artifacts like this. Could the shroud's hidden DNA hold answers to humanity's forgotten past? Let's dive in. The cloth that shouldn't exist. The Shroud of Turin is not just an ancient piece of fabric. It's a challenge to everything we think we know about history, science, and faith. Measuring over 14 feet long and nearly 4 feet wide, it bears the ghostly front and back images of a man who appears to have been crucified. The image is faint, sepia-toned, and strange. It looks more like a photographic negative than any kind of painting or print. This strange quality wasn't even discovered until 1898, when an Italian photographer named Secondo Pia took the first photograph of it. In the negative image, the blurry outline sharpened into the clear face of a man. It was as if the shroud had been waiting for modern technology to reveal its secrets. What's most baffling is how the image was formed. It's not made of paint, dye, or pigment. Microscopic analysis has shown that the image only rests on the topmost fibers of the linen, so lightly touched that even the best artists and chemists can't recreate it with medieval tools. And this is where the mystery deepens. Because if this cloth didn't come from the medieval era and wasn't forged, then what is it? Graham Hancock often speaks of ancient artifacts as messages from the past, misunderstood by conventional academia. The Shroud of Turin fits perfectly into his worldview, a relic that defies simple explanation, buried beneath layers of institutional skepticism. For Hancock, the key question isn't whether the shroud is real in a religious sense, but whether it points to an ancient truth we've forgotten or ignored. The shroud, like so many other relics he examines, may represent a fracture in the timeline, evidence of something older, deeper, and more mysterious than history wants to admit. A body imprinted in light? Or something else? There is no body inside the Shroud of Turin. No bones, no physical remains. And yet, what's left behind is eerily human. A man, bearded, with arms crossed, showing wounds to the wrists, feet, side, and forehead. The injuries match those described in the biblical account of Jesus' crucifixion. But even if one strips away the religious narrative, the forensic detail is hard to ignore. Medical experts have analyzed the image and found signs of scourging, asphyxiation, and trauma that align with Roman execution methods. That in itself is unsettling. But what truly separates the shroud from any ordinary artifact is how the image got there. Scientists from the 1978 Shroud of Turin research project examined the cloth with X-rays, ultraviolet light, infrared, and microscopy. What they found was strange. The image had no brush strokes, no signs of heat, and no substances consistent with known pigments. It's not stained, it's not painted, and it's not burned. The image exists only on the surface, on fibers less than 1/1000th of an inch thick. Below that? Nothing. So how did it happen? One theory suggests some form of radiation or energy burst from the body, imprinting the cloth like a reverse photo. It sounds like science fiction, but it's a serious hypothesis explored by physicists and chemists. Others believe in a chemical reaction between body and cloth, maybe something triggered during decomposition. Then there's the fringe idea of proto-photography, suggesting someone in the Middle Ages knew optics and silver nitrate centuries before it was invented. Graham Hancock has long argued that humanity suffers from amnesia, that civilizations before us knew we've lost. Could the Shroud of Turin be physical evidence of such forgotten science? Or is it something even stranger? Something we haven't yet dared to name? DNA on linen, a silent archive of history. In recent years, the Shroud of Turin has entered the realm of genetic science. While older studies focused on the image itself, modern researchers have turned their attention to something nearly invisible: DNA. Dust collected from the cloth's surface, particularly between it and its backing cloth, contained microscopic fragments of biological material. When examined using next-generation sequencing, what emerged was astonishing. This wasn't just dust, it was a genetic time capsule. Scientists found human DNA, but not from one person. It came from people across the globe: Western Europe, the Middle East, East Africa, even India and East Asia. Some of the DNA was embedded deep within the fibers, too far in to be the result of recent contamination. Other samples came from blood particles. And here's where it gets strange. The blood contained Y chromosome markers associated with Middle Eastern populations, specifically the J1 haplogroup, common among Jewish and Levantine groups. That lines up with the geography of Jesus' life. Even more intriguing, the blood showed high levels of bilirubin and creatinine, both indicators of extreme physical trauma before death, just as the image depicts. Graham Hancock might see this not as proof of divinity, but as evidence of buried truths, real human suffering encoded in linen, carried across centuries. For him, and many others, DNA doesn't just tell us where a cloth came from. It tells us who we've chosen to forget. Plant DNA added another layer to the mystery. Traces of thorny plants native to Jerusalem, resins used in ancient burial rites, and even bacteria from the Dead Sea region all point to the cloth spending time in the ancient Middle East. If this is forgery, it's impossibly precise. If it's not, then the shroud may be holding a story far older than we thought. Middle Eastern clues and a global journey. The shroud's DNA doesn't just whisper about its past, it maps a journey across continents. Embedded in its fibers are fragments of genetic material from plants, humans, and microorganisms, many of which point unmistakably to the Middle East. Pollen from plants that bloom only in the Jerusalem area during March and April, right around Passover. DNA from Gundelia tourneforti, a spiny plant some believe could be the same used in the crown of thorns. Traces of Ziziphus spina Christi, also known as Christ's thorn. Burial herbs like Cistus creticus, once used in ancient Jewish rituals, also leave their mark. But the genetic trail doesn't end there. The shroud carries markers from France, Spain, Italy, and the Alps, regions known to have housed or displayed the cloth at different points in its recorded history. Surprisingly, DNA tied to populations in India was also found, particularly from the western coastal regions, along with traces of Indian-grown cotton. That might suggest the linen itself, its raw materials, originated from ancient trade routes that connected the Indian subcontinent with the Mediterranean world. It's a remarkable convergence, a burial cloth showing Middle Eastern blood, wrapped in fabric possibly woven from Indian cotton, journeying through Europe across centuries. That's not a local forgery. That's a global artifact.
It had been moved around from time to time.
Graham Hancock has often warned against the idea that history is a straight, neat line. To him, artifacts like this hint at forgotten networks, civilizations, and sacred objects that carried knowledge across ancient boundaries. The Shroud of Turin, with its global DNA footprint, doesn't just belong to one religion or one place. It may be the silent witness of an ancient story, one that links Jerusalem to Asia, to Europe, and perhaps to a deeper human mystery we haven't yet dared to uncover.
Now first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you.
The battle between science and belief. No artifact in human history has been tested, debated, and doubted quite like the Shroud of Turin. And yet, after centuries of scrutiny, the divide between science and belief remains as wide as ever. The most decisive blow seemed to come in 1988, when radiocarbon dating placed the shroud's origin between 1260 and 1390 AD, right in the heart of medieval Europe. To many, that sealed its fate as a forgery. But science, like history, is never that simple. Critics of the 1988 tests pointed out a crucial detail. The samples used came from a corner of the cloth, a spot handled frequently and possibly repaired during the Middle Ages. In 2005, chemist Raymond Rogers published evidence that this section contained cotton fibers and dye not found in the rest of the cloth. If true, the test dated the repair, not the original linen, and that changes everything. Meanwhile, new chemical tests detected vanillin, a compound that fades over time. The corner sample still had it. The main body of the shroud? None, suggesting the cloth may be much older than the tested piece. And now, DNA adds yet another layer. Degraded fragments embedded deep within bloodstains show signs of ancient damage, more consistent with centuries-old material than with recent contamination. Middle Eastern haplogroups dominate the blood, not European ones. These findings don't confirm that the cloth once wrapped Jesus, but they do make the simple forgery theory harder to defend. For someone like Graham Hancock, the shroud's contradictions are the very point. The truth may never lie fully within the reach of carbon dating or molecular sequencing. The real mystery is how such a complex, deeply human object has survived, with stories encoded in blood, linen, and time. A relic that resists easy answers, demanding we look deeper. What the shroud means in a forgotten history. The Shroud of Turin is more than a relic. It's a rupture in the narrative, a crack in the polished story modern civilization tells about itself. Whether it's a medieval creation or a genuine burial cloth from the 1st century, its existence forces us to confront uncomfortable possibilities. How did such detailed forensic accuracy appear centuries before forensic science? How did unknown image formation techniques imprint a photographic negative onto linen before photography was even imagined? Graham Hancock's work revolves around questions like these. He believes our collective memory is fractured, that somewhere in humanity's deep past, a chapter was lost. The shroud may not be the key to unlocking all of it, but it is a symbol of that loss, a piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit, yet refuses to be ignored. If the DNA findings are correct, if this cloth truly carries biological signatures from ancient Jerusalem, if its blood is from a man who suffered intense trauma, and if the fibers trace back to ancient trade networks, then we're not just looking at a religious icon. We're holding something that crossed cultures, continents, and centuries, a witness to forgotten rituals, hidden knowledge, and possibly a very real person. That's what makes the shroud powerful. Not because it proves anything, but because it forces us to ask again, what have we forgotten? What was erased, or buried, or rebranded as myth? And how many other truths, like this linen cloth, are still lying quietly in the dark, waiting to be seen? The mystery that refuses to fade. In the end, the Shroud of Turin defies resolution. Every answer leads to more questions. Every test uncovers deeper complexity. It has survived fires, wars, skepticism, and centuries of human contact. Yet the image remains, faint but persistent, like a memory that refuses to fade. Modern science has pulled apart its fibers, examined its blood, and decoded its DNA. Yet no single theory explains it all. Radiation? Chemistry? Ancient photography? A miracle? No consensus. And that's what makes it so haunting. The Shroud sits at the intersection of science, history, and belief, but refuses to fully belong to any of them. For Graham Hancock, mysteries like this aren't meant to be solved neatly. They are invitations to think differently, to question timelines, to reconsider what we call knowledge. In his view, the Shroud of Turin might be one of many ancient artifacts that point toward a forgotten human legacy, a world where science and spirituality weren't so divided. Whether you see the Shroud as evidence of Christ, an ancient burial tradition, or an artifact wrapped in centuries of myth, one thing is clear: it resists simplification. It doesn't scream for attention, it whispers. And those whispers have echoed across time, from the caves of Jerusalem to the cathedrals of Europe, to the labs of modern researchers. Perhaps its power lies not in proving anything, but in reminding us how much we still don't know. In a world that moves too fast to wonder, the Shroud forces us to pause, to look, to question. A legacy written in threads. For over 6 centuries, the Shroud of Turin has silently endured, passed from knight to bishop, from battlefield to cathedral, from doubters to believers. Yet it has never been fully explained. Its legacy isn't just the mystery of the image or the question of authenticity, it's the way it draws together people from different disciplines, beliefs, and backgrounds into one long, unfinished conversation. In that way, the Shroud mirrors the kind of legacy Graham Hancock often speaks about. Not a legacy built on consensus, but one built on curiosity. A relic like this survives not because it provides certainty, but because it refuses to be ignored. Its DNA doesn't settle the argument. Instead, it expands it.
The new evidence relating to the Shroud of Turin, and could it resurrect the Shroud as the most potent relic of Christianity?
Middle Eastern markers, ancient plant residues, and trauma-written blood weave a global story that challenges both science and religion to go deeper. And still, it lies behind glass in the Turin Cathedral, quiet, unmoving, but not forgotten. To skeptics, the Shroud remains a riddle that science hasn't solved yet. To believers, it's sacred proof of a resurrection. To historians and researchers, it's a data-rich anomaly, constantly reshaping how we think about the past. But to everyone willing to look closely, it is something rare, a living contradiction. Perhaps the Shroud's true legacy is that it keeps asking us the same question in new ways. Are we willing to question our assumptions? To admit we don't have all the answers? To consider that truth might still be hidden, in plain sight, stitched into a centuries-old piece of cloth? The silence between the facts. Amid all the scientific data, historical records, and religious interpretations, there's something else about the Shroud of Turin, something harder to define. It's the silence, the unsettling stillness of that image. No matter how many times it's analyzed or photographed, the face on the cloth seems to say nothing and everything all at once. It doesn't demand belief. It just exists, quiet, present, watching. This is the part that science can't measure and religion can't fully claim. The emotional weight of the Shroud lies not in the details, but in the space between them. The way it makes people stop, the way it makes them feel curious, shaken, and moved. Whether you see a crucified man, a masterful forgery, or a spiritual symbol, the response it evokes is real. And that might be its greatest mystery. Graham Hancock often speaks of ancient sites and artifacts as places where memory lingers, where something beyond language and logic is left behind. The Shroud of Turin fits that idea. It isn't just an object, it's an experience. It challenges not just our intellect, but our intuition. That may be why the Shroud endures. Not because it proves anything definitively, but because it invites us into uncertainty and asks us to sit there for a moment. In a world desperate for quick answers, it remains unsolved. A reminder that not all truths come with clear explanations. Some are wrapped in cloth, written in silence, and meant to be felt before they're understood. Echoes of a forgotten message.
No matter the evidence, the Shroud of Turin may always remain a mystery.
The Shroud of Turin doesn't offer conclusions. It offers echoes, fragments of something older, deeper, and perhaps deliberately forgotten. Across its fibers, we find evidence of places, people, and processes that span centuries and continents. It is both physical and symbolic, a paradox woven in linen. It holds scientific intrigue and spiritual weight in equal measure. And maybe that's why it refuses to fade into obscurity. To Graham Hancock, such artifacts are not isolated anomalies, they are clues. Clues that suggest our history is far more complex than we've been taught, that civilizations may have risen and fallen long before the official timelines, that some knowledge, spiritual, technological, or both, was lost, hidden, or buried beneath layers of time. The Shroud fits neatly into this framework, not as a piece of proof, but as a piece of resistance. Resistance to easy narratives, resistance to silence. Even if we never know who made it, how the image formed, or whose blood is there, the Shroud of Turin has already done something extraordinary. It has pulled back the curtain. It has made us look closer, not just at the cloth, but at ourselves, at our assumptions, in our collective memory. It has reminded us that truth often hides in the gaps, in the things we overlook or dismiss. And in that sense, it is more than just a relic. It is a question. A quiet, enduring question passed from one generation to the next. What if we've been wrong about everything? We live in an age of answers, of data, certainty, and proof. Yet the Shroud of Turin remains untouched by finality. It doesn't confirm or deny, but instead lingers in the space between belief and evidence. Its DNA, its image, its silence all speak without speaking. Graham Hancock reminds us that history is often written by what survives and misremembered by what doesn't. Maybe the Shroud isn't here to be solved. Maybe it's here to remind us that some truths can only be felt, not proven. In the end, its mystery isn't a flaw, it's the message, and the message still waits.